So, what if one of the most celebrated thinkers of our time, Yuval Noah Harari, has actually built the philosophical justification for a totally new kind of oppression? Well, that is the bombshell claim at the heart of the book, Anti Harari. And in this explainer, we're going to dig in and deconstruct its really powerful critique of his biggest ideas.
Right from the get-go, the book throws down the gauntlet with this dedication. It sets a really provocative tone. This tells you that this isn't just some abstract academic debate. The author is signaling that this is a deeply personal fight, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
All right, so here's the central argument, and it's a big one. The book draws this incredible parallel through history. It basically says that just like the medieval theologian Thomas Aquinas justified the whole feudal system with his masterpiece, the Summa Theologica, Harari has created a brand new Summa Technologica, a grand overarching theory that essentially justifies the power of today's tech elite.
Let's think about it like this for a second. Aquinas built this magnificent cathedral of ideas that made feudalism seem like it was God's plan, the natural order of things. The critique here is that Harari has done the exact same thing for our digital age. He's built this new Summa Technologica that frames our tech-driven world not as one of many possible choices, but as a kind of evolutionary inevitability. Now, this new worldview, this new cathedral, is built on three core pillars. The book calls them dogmas, ideas that are presented to us as cold, hard scientific fact, but which the critique argues really function more like articles of faith. So let's break them down one by one.
First step, we've got the most fundamental dogma of all. This is the one that redefines what life itself even is. The central idea that all living creatures, and that includes you and me, are basically just really, really complex algorithms. And look, this isn't a straw man. Here's Harari's foundational claim, right there in his own words. The idea that every living thing is, at its core, a data processing system. It's a really simple but incredibly powerful concept, and honestly, it's the key that unlocks his entire worldview. But anti-Harari fires right back with a simple biological fact. An algorithm is a closed system. It follows its code. But a living organism? It's fundamentally open. We are constantly exchanging energy and matter with our environment. And that difference is absolutely crucial. Think about it. An algorithm can simulate hunger, but a living body actually starves.
And this objection, it goes even deeper, right into our own anatomy. The critique points out that the brain isn't really this top-down command center we imagine it to be. Get this, 80% of the signals on the vagus nerve, a major information highway, flow from the body up to the brain. And then you have our gut with its own second brain, and our microbiome, which literally influences our moods and decisions. This is not a top-down program.
So the counter-argument is this. The body is not a computer program. It is a vibrant, messy, interconnected ecology. The logic at play here is much more like a complex rainforest than it is a clean line of code. And, okay, if we aren't just simple algorithms, that leads us straight to the next huge question. And this is where we get into the second dogma, that highly controversial idea of free will. You see, Harari's worldview kind of forces us to ask this really unsettling question. If our feelings are just biochemical calculations happening in our brain, is that sense you have of making a choice, your free will, is it just an illusion? Just a story your brain tells you after the fact to make sense of a decision that was already made for you by the algorithm? To push back against this, the critique introduces this really fascinating distinction. It suggests we separate our mind into two different parts. First, you've got the cortical ego. That's the voice in your head, the storyteller. It runs on language, and it's actually pretty easy to influence or hack. But underneath that, there's the root mind, the body's deep biological intelligence, the fundamental drives that exist way before conscious thought. And this is where the book says our real will is located. It's not a conscious thought. It's what it calls the somatic ego. It's that physical feeling of thirst or of fear, or that deep, gut-level no that happens before your thinking mind even has a chance to spin a story about it. So, okay, we've kind of picked apart the philosophy. But now we get to the political project that the book claims is hiding behind it. Because you have to ask, if you actually believe the human body is just a hackable machine with no real will, what does that ideology empower people to do? The book gives this a name, and it's a chilling one: the techno-colonial harvest. The argument is shockingly simple. Just like old-school colonialism treated foreign lands as territories to be stripped of their resources, this new ideology treats the human body as the next frontier, a new territory to be mapped,
mined, and exploited for its most valuable resource: data. And according to this critique, this whole harvest follows a clear three-stage cycle. First, you amplify fear and anxiety, because anxious people are predictable people. Second, you harvest their fractured attention and sell it as a commodity. And third, when people inevitably burn out from this cycle, you monetize their exhaustion by relabeling it as a medical symptom that conveniently needs a new product or service to fix it. The book argues that all this leads to a really terrifying endgame, one described by Harari himself: the creation of a useless class. This is a massive population of people made redundant by AI and technology, who are then managed and kept docile with, and these are his own words, drugs and computer games.
So, wow, if that's the bleak diagnosis, is there any way out? Where can we possibly find a source of resistance? Well, the final part of the book is dedicated to laying out an alternative philosophy. It's a philosophy called somatic materialism, and the core idea is pretty profound. It says that real resistance doesn't come from some abstract, metaphysical concept like a soul. It comes from the messy, material, irreducible reality of the living body itself. It's biological intelligence that can never be perfectly measured, predicted, or controlled. This is what the book calls the somatic excess. It's the simple, obvious truth that the actual feeling of joy or of fear is always so much more than the data point that tries to represent it. You know, your smartwatch can track your heart rate, but it can never, ever capture the actual experience, the excess reality of what it feels like to be alive in that moment. And this all leads to the ultimate form of resistance, a concept the book calls the metabolic veto. Now, this isn't a conscious choice or a political protest. It is the body's non-negotiable biological no. It's the physical reality of burnout, of illness, of exhaustion. It's what happens when a living organism simply refuses to operate in a rhythm that it cannot metabolically sustain. And so, the book leaves us with this final haunting image, which is a play on another very famous manifesto. It suggests that in an age that worships the algorithm, the one specter, the one thing that can't be fully calculated, controlled, or coded, is the living, breathing, and ultimately the resistant human body.